The opinions expressed on this program represent the viewpoints of individual authors or contributors and do not necessarily reflect those of Troy University.
Welcome to International Insights. I am Doug Davis, and with me is Michael Slobodchikoff. On this episode, we'll be speaking with General Sean MacFarland. General MacFarland has an extensive and impressive military service record. He is a retired three-star lieutenant general who served in the U.S. Army. General MacFarland was the commander of the coalition against ISIS in Syria and Iraq and commanded the 1st Brigade Combat Team in the 2006 Battle of Ramadi. General MacFarland, welcome to the program from Texas.
Thanks. Good to be with you.
General, I'd like to ask you about the military's responsibilities, which have changed over time. The armed services have taken on additional tasks in addition to traditional military tasks, such as managing foreign relations. Military leaders now function as diplomats as they work on multinational missions. How important is military diplomacy to U.S. national security?
It's absolutely essential. Clausewitz famously said that war is an extension of politics by other means. And while as a serving officer it's important to remain nonpartisan, at the senior level you have to be political, not in the domestic political sense, but be aware of your political environment and understand that sometimes you have to influence that. I like to think of the train rolling down the railroad track as sort of a metaphor for a campaign plan. And you can't wait for the diplomats to lay all the track for that campaign plan. Sometimes the uniform leaders have to help lay that track as well, particularly with our foreign leaders. I met with the Prime Minister of Iraq on a weekly basis, along with most of the other key cabinet members of the Iraqi government, as well as other entities in Syria. Well, not Syria, obviously, but yes, in Syria. I met with some of the folks there, some of the resistance. Jordan, Turkey, and the Kurdish leaders, and then of course there were also the coalition member ambassadors, and then there was our own ambassador. So, it was really important for me to stay connected with all of them to ensure that the campaign had the political support locally that was necessary, as well as to ensure that our allies and partners felt that they were being respected and included in the important decisions that were being made. And then back in the United States, that I was really fulfilling my duty, and in some cases informing the folks back in the States what the art of the possible was, and helping them formulate their own policy as a result.
Excellent. General MacFarland, you provide an excellent example of military diplomacy, and you were the commander of the coalition against ISIS in Syria and Iraq, which saw you manage and coordinate the combined joint task force and Operation Inherent Resolve. How has your work with the foreign partners contributed to the success of the mission?
Well, there were two sets of foreign partners, really. There were the coalition partners, and then there were the indigenous partners on the ground that actually did the bulk of the fighting. So we had 29 troop contributing nations. There were other members of the coalition that contributed other resources other than troops, but of the troop contributing nations, it was important for us to not only include them as much as we possibly could and leverage them, but also make sure that when they departed, brought their troops back to the States, or I'm sorry, back to their home countries, that we had a solution to backfill them somehow. So that took a process of engagement and planning that I put one of my deputy commanding generals in charge of to oversee. At the same time, we had to manage the influx of military weapons and aid to the Iraqi government from all different kinds of partners. And because money is fungible, the train and equip money that we were giving to the Iraqi government was in some cases being used to purchase military equipment. Sometimes that equipment was good, sometimes it could have been better, or was not necessarily compatible with other equipment that we bought. I mean, we see this in Ukraine now. They have, multiple types of 155 artillery pieces that can't use the same kind of 155 round. And so maintaining and resupplying those kinds of complex systems is a challenge in its own right. And then when you have multiple versions of it, it makes it even harder. So that was another aspect. And then the third aspect was working with, as I said, the indigenous partners on the ground. There's a saying, you've heard it, friend, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, but that's very transactional. It's very situational dependent. Today, they may be the enemy of your enemy. Tomorrow they may be enemies of each other. I mean, or they could both be enemies of us. An example is the al-Nusra Front and ISIS in Syria. One was Al-Qaeda aligned and the other was ISIS aligned. They were fighting each other, and they were both fighting against the Assad regime. Okay, are any of those our friends? No, absolutely not. So, but then you had other folks who some days they were fighting the Assad regime, some days they were fighting ISIS. When fighting the Assad regime, they would be aligned with ISIS, and then they have to turn around and fight ISIS at our behest. So it was difficult for them to manage that relationship. And understanding the situations that we were putting them in required a lot of firsthand interaction with their leaders to make sure that our expectations of them were reasonable, and that whatever they needed in order to kind of shift their priorities was provided.
Fantastic. General MacFarland, I'd like to ask you about something that you mentioned earlier, which is dealing with international coalitions. And international conflicts are more complex today with the military directly involved in maintaining and managing these international coalitions, as you were just talking about. How would you recommend that we prepare future military leaders to strategically coordinate and manage coalitions in a way that allows the U.S. to accomplish its military goals?
Yeah, well, part of it, at least in my case, was the result of a lot of firsthand experience as a member of coalitions. NATO being sort of the gold standard, but a lot of coalitions are not NATO-based. In Afghanistan, NATO was the basis, and that formed sort of the framework, as it was in Bosnia, which I was also a member of that staff in Bosnia as well. So from Sarajevo to Kabul, we had the NATO framework. In Baghdad, we didn't, but it formed sort of a helpful model. It was a helpful model for us to organize around. We didn't have the STANAGs, the standard NATO agreements that help us to all be interoperable. But the fact that I had enough experience with NATO staffs and headquarters allowed us to adopt some of those processes, as cumbersome as they might have been, at least they were a process that we didn't have to start with a clean sheet of paper and apply those. And then you have the core, the Five Eyes and NATO partners and allies who come in, and they immediately get how to work with us anyway. And then what you do is then you bring in the outer concentric circles of allies and partners in, and they start to snap in their own ways. Probably the most difficult aspect in any theater that I've served in a coalition environment is establishing a common shared operating picture and network because of intel sharing agreements and people's ability to plug into a network. Oftentimes you have to provide that to them. If you're going to actually ask a coalition partner to conduct combat operations and you want them to be interoperable with U.S. systems, you generally have to provide the equivalent of what we would call in the Army a digital liaison detachment, which would be a group of American soldiers primarily with the battle command systems, and they can just park inside that headquarters of our ally or partner and perform that the role of sort of a air gap sneaker net type of an interface with them, so that we can provide them with fires support or logistics support or whatever it is that they require, or just to give them, so you can't always give orders to indigenous partners because it's a coalition of the willing, but to inform them of what you're trying to do and keep them aware.
You commanded the 1st Brigade Combat Team and led the 2006 Battle of Ramadi, which was an important step in defeating al-Qaeda. After Fallujah, your success in Ramadi was important to turn the tide against al-Qaeda. What lessons did you learn from the battle that helped you in your future work in the Middle East?
Well, I learned, one of the things I learned a lot about was Ramadi and Anbar province, which when I came back in 2015 was again the scene of very intense fighting. So I was already familiar with the battlefield. And of course the human terrain, getting to know the sheikhs in that area was important in 2006 and 2007. A bit less important in 2015 and 2016 because the Maliki regime in Iraq had alienated the Sunni population and oppressed them to the point where they were accepting initially of ISIS, when ISIS kind of grew to resist sort of the Shia oppression. And then, of course, ISIS being ISIS, they eventually overplayed their hand and began oppressing the Sunni tribes themselves. And when they tried to resist, they massacred a lot of the tribesmen that we had formerly worked with. So many of them scattered, and we were not able to recreate the Sunni Arab awakening that we had in 2006 and 2007. Likewise, we tried to do that in Afghanistan when I was a 2-star in Afghanistan, and that ultimately didn't happen either. And I think, obviously, part of a counterinsurgency strategy is to separate the population from the people from the insurgency, right? And if the insurgents are viewed as outsiders, that's much easier to do. And if they're not, then you're not going to have much success. So, for example, in Gaza, trying to separate Hamas from the Gaza people, it's going to be very difficult because they're one and the same in 75% of the cases, or if not more. In Iraq, you had Al Qaeda, Zarqawi from Jordan, and people like that who are not really seen as members of their tribes. And being a tribal society in Anbar province, which was a very rural desert type of a province, the tribes were very powerful and important. So if you could separate the tribes from these non-tribal forces, then you were going to be able to separate the population, and you were going to win. In Afghanistan, the tribes were not particularly powerful. The society was much more village focused, and family clannish kind of focused. So there were very few powerful sheikhs. Warlords would have been the closest thing to a sheikh in Afghanistan, and you just weren't able to find anybody with the kind of authority that a sheikh would have. So, to have an awakening, you really need three things. You need, I liken it to internal combustion. You have the air, the fuel, and the spark, right? So the fuel was the population who were alienated by the excesses of the insurgency. The air was sort of what we provided as a coalition. We gave them the room to breathe. We kind of kept the enemy at arm's length, and then the spark was provided by the enemy, by Al Qaeda. In Ramadi, they murdered a sheikh, and then they left the body where it couldn't be found for days, which is in violation of custom, where they want to bury people within 24 hours. And that was pretty outrageous to the locals, and that helped spark, that was the catalyst that kind of brought the sheikhs back to the table with us. So there were a lot of other factors at play, but those were the three main ones. We had enough people, military age males, for instance, in Afghanistan, but we didn't have, and we certainly had plenty of sparks by the enemy, but and we were there to provide the air, but we couldn't get them all in one place at one time and then get a chain reaction going. You could get an awakening in one valley, but the next valley over was not considered the same, group of people. They were outsiders. When I came back to Iraq in 2015 and 2016, we didn't have the fuel anymore. The people, just like in Afghanistan, the fuel was in like little, they weren't in 5-gallon cans or 15-gallon gas tanks. They were like in little, vials, of, maybe a few ounces at a time. So you couldn't really get the chain reaction. And when we came back, because the sheikhs had been so intimidated or killed off, that we couldn't really reconstitute the awakening. But in 2006 and 2007, we were able to get it going. And because of the awakening in Anbar, which started in Ramadi, that created enough of an uprising among the Sunnis that extended even into Baghdad, where tribal authority tends to break down in the large cities, that you got about 80,000 to 100,000 additional armed tribesmen who actually knew who was who the bad guys were amongst them. They couldn't hide among the population anymore. So more than the additional fighters, what was important was they had the human intelligence. And we saw this again and again in Ramadi in 2006 and 2007, where the sheikhs would just go out and kill people that they knew were the enemy before they even talked to us. And then they would just inform us, oh, we got a whole bunch of these guys. Okay, great. And we saw the evidence of that in the declining level of violence. And at the same time, these tribesmen would turn over large caches of ammunition, which they said they found, but which they more than likely buried when they were insurgents a few months prior. But when their tribe shifted over, now they said, okay, we'll just turn this stuff in for the cash reward. So it's a very powerful tool, and as General Petraeus himself has said, that awakening is what really enabled the surge to succeed, because an additional 30,000 Americans wasn't going to be enough to significantly, shift the dynamic in a country of over 25 million. So what was it? It was the Sunni awakening, and that made all the difference. And then there were some other things that went on with the Shia militia groups that was another story, but I didn't have as much to do with that. Not in 2006 and 7 had a lot to do with Shia militia groups and Operation Inherent Resolve, obviously.
General MacFarland, in looking at the Middle East, the contemporary Middle East, what are the major security concerns in the region today? And what would you say were the military's biggest achievements in Iraq and Syria? And what were the lessons that the U.S. could have done better?
Yeah, well, the biggest security threat in the Middle East is Iran, by far. They're behind both Sunni and Shia foreign terrorist organizations. But if you look at, ISIS, I mean, they are a terrorist threat, but they're not building ballistic missiles and, nuclear weapons. I mean, they are a problem in the region that has spread into Africa, and for that reason, they need to be suppressed, and we need to manage that as best we can for a long time. I mean, that problem is not going to go away as long as you have Iran and Shia-dominated governments giving a casus belli to to Sunnis and giving them cause, for grievances, and then you're going to have outfits like ISIS causing problems around the world. So I think it all comes back to Iran, and we have not really sufficiently confronted that challenge that Iran poses to regional stability. We tried to work with them. That didn't work. We tried to isolate them. That worked somewhat, but it hasn't fully solved the issue. So I think a more definitive solution is probably going to be required before you're going to achieve anything close to stability in the Middle East. We learned how to do counterinsurgency in Iraq, probably slower than we should have, but we did learn. And we have confronted Iran, probably slower than we should have, but we are now confronting them. So I think eventually there's going to have to be a sort of a regional alliance, maybe based around the GCC, Saudi Arabia being the largest of that, to stand up to Iran, and we're going to have to provide the backing for that, and that, I think, is what is going to ultimately result in stability in that region.
I'm going to broaden this a little bit and ask, what are the strategic areas where the United States is vulnerable today, and how do you recommend that we address these areas of concern?
So there's quite a few, unfortunately, areas of concern. You hear a lot about cyber and AI, and so I'll just say cyber is one of them, and acknowledge that yes, it can be problematic for us because we are so dependent on our information technology just to get our forces deployed out of their home stations to ports of embarkation. That is going to be a challenge. Other challenges, obviously, are in space. We rely very heavily on space for our communications and early warning and intelligence gathering for targeting. That's definitely a big challenge for us. Our defense industrial base is severely challenged. Our supply chains are global, and that's a post Cold War phenomenon where we've went from like 50 prime defense contractors down to 5. And they have very international supply chains. So we can't build everything that we need here in the United States anymore. And so our ability to stand in for a large-scale combat operation and sustain ourselves, reconstitute our battle losses, much as you see the Russians doing in Ukraine, will be significantly challenged. I mean, we're having a hard time just ramping up our munitions production rate for artillery. We thought we were going to be at 100,000, 155 rounds per month or something like that by this year. Now it's probably going to be next year. I mean, everything is harder now. And what's going on right now in the world in terms of U.S. policy, trade policy, and is probably going to make that even more difficult, at least in the near term. Maybe in the long term it'll be better, but in the short term, it's just going to make it even harder for us. So that's a threat. Nuclear. The U.S. Nuclear enterprise has aged significantly. We are in uncharted waters. We've never had nuclear weapons this old. And we haven't really ramped up production of new ones yet. We're making them in small quantities again now, but nothing on the scale that we did at the peak of the Cold War. So, and then what is our doctrine against a multipolar threat? How, when it was just the U.S. versus the Soviet Union, it was, you could have the mutually assured destruction, and all that was relatively straightforward because it was a binary issue. Now you have what is known as the three-body problem, where you introduce China, the Soviet Union, and then now if you throw in North Korea and potentially Iran down the road as hostile nuclear powers, you create a nonlinear equation, that isn't soluble by any known means. It's unpredictable, and that's very dangerous. So what does that mean? That means we have to have a strong offensive capability, but we also have to have an equally strong defensive capability. You saw the Chinese test a partial orbit nuclear weapon. That's not ballistic. That can just deorbit wherever they want to deorbit it. And because there's so many objects on orbit, it can be difficult to detect in a timely manner and intercept. So, it's not, the distant early warning line across Canada and Greenland where all the ICBMs that we were facing were going to come across the North Pole, and we knew where they were coming from. Now they could come from almost any direction. So nuclear, that's another problem. And then, the challenge posed by China is if we have to confront China militarily along what is known as the first island chain, that is going to cause a lot of those problems that we haven't really confronted since the Second World War when we were fighting the Japanese. You're going to have very long contested supply lines of communication over sea lanes, and you're going to have to sustain forces in very difficult tropical environments that are going to be now within range of mainland China missiles, and they'll have tremendous magazine depth relative to us because they're fighting basically on their front doorstep, and we're fighting very far from home. So it's going to be a very difficult challenge for us, and how we're going to organize for that is something that we're still kind of coming to grips with. And the Defense Department has come up with what they call the joint warfighting concept to try to figure out how we're going to fight, these deal with these complex conflicts around the world, and until we solve all of those other problems, the odds are going to be not as favorable as we would like them to be.
General MacFarland, I'm afraid we're out of time. It has been truly a great pleasure for the two of us to speak to you today, and I know we've learned a tremendous amount from you. And we want to thank you for your service and thank you for your continued expertise. And thank you for coming on the show today.
Happy to be here with you guys. Thanks for inviting me, and look forward to future projects any way I can help you. All right?
Perfect. Thank you so much, General.
Thanks a lot.